I'm putting up this video to supplement the first two postings. Just a word about the videos. I'm using a program that permits me to do record videos in 15-minute increments. If I go over the 15 minutes, I'll obviously make a second video, but you don't have to worry about that. I'll just label them appropriately in the proper place in the 2-week period in Blackboard, and obviously for these videos it will be for the first 2-week period. I haven't figured out how YouTube puts a number on the videos, but it doesn't concern us so long as I put the videos in the right place. And for that matter, you don't need to worry about the YouTube channel. So just getting back now to this first posting, what I want to emphasize is that paralegals are not directly regulated by the government. They're not directly regulated by the government because they're not licensed. For example, most of us have a license to drive a car, so the government can regulate our conduct in driving a car simply by taking action against our license. Similarly, lawyers are licensed to practice law. So if a lawyer screws up, the lawyer's license can be suspended, it can be revoked. The lawyer can be admonished that if the lawyer engages in similar conduct, that action can be taken against the license. But if you have people performing a function that's not licensed, then obviously the licensing process cannot be used as a regulatory tool. A question could arise, well, why aren't paralegals licensed? That gets us into another matter that is probably beyond the scope of what we're immediately concerned about. I'm going to suggest to you that there are historical and economic factors that have led to paralegals not being licensed. In certain jurisdictions, paralegals are certified or registered by a state, not in New York, however, but even in those states where paralegals are certified or registered, they're not licensed, and people can perform paralegal functions in those states without being registered or certified, because when you examine the registration and certification processes of those states, you'll see that the certification and registration really deals with how lawyers can charge paralegal time when it comes to lawsuits where lawyer time and staff time can be compensated. But that doesn't concern us here in New York State. Now, if paralegals are not licensed, then what we could say is that the regulation that would occur with paralegals would be regulations or laws that apply to everyone. So one law that applies to everyone is that you can't practice law without a license. And therefore, no matter how important paralegals are, and no matter how closely they work with lawyers, what we'll be talking about down the road is what does it mean to practice law so that you need a license, and how should paralegals take care, and lawyers take care, that paralegals don't violate that rule. The other thing I wanted to say, which is not in the first posting, is that paralegals are not licensed really creates something for you, the student, to think about. Because since paralegals are not licensed, anybody, if he or she wants to, can call themselves a paralegal. And there are many people working as paralegals, if we look at the functions of what they're doing, and they never got a paralegal degree. So what I'm going to tell you is you don't need the paralegal degree to become legally a paralegal. And what I'm going to suggest, however, is that the paralegal degree will be helpful in your placement on the job market. So, and more about education and legal education in the next posting, which I'll put up in next. So now we have the second posting up, and the second posting talks about licensed attorneys and where they can be found. First question, why are we talking about licensed attorneys? Well, paralegals work with or for licensed attorneys. So if we can figure out who is a licensed attorney, and if we can figure out where we can find them, we're going to, for that reason alone, begin to learn about what paralegals are doing out there and where we can find them out there. First, though, with licensed attorneys, I suspect that at least some of you, at least this has been the case with my students over the last decades, some of you are thinking that perhaps you might want to become a lawyer, which I applaud. Goals are great. So I've put some information in this posting about the process of becoming a licensed attorney in New York. So I'm looking at educational requirements. You need a 4-year degree. Then you need to get into a law school and get a 3-year degree. Between your 4-year degree and the law school and getting into the law school, you take an exam that most law schools look very closely at when they're considering their admissions, and that's the LSAT, or the Law School Aptitude Test. And so what I would say to you is, down the road, if you're considering applying for law school as you near the end of a 4-year program and you're going to take the LSAT, take a prep course. Kaplan, for example, offers one. And the prep course will boost your score on the LSAT, and points on the LSAT are so important some of the time in terms of does a person get into a law school or not. And what I also would want to point out, I'm looking here, I looked last fall, and there was about 250 law schools in the United States. So, and by the way, there's probably 250 4-year and 2-year colleges between Buffalo and New York City. But nationwide, there's only 250 law schools. So as I point out, it's a very competitive process to get into a law school, which means practically get your grades as high as you possibly can here at ECC and whatever 4-year school you end up in. After a person obtains a law school degree, and before they become a lawyer, they have to pass the bar exam. That's the licensing exam, and I've given you a little bit of information about that. That's obviously going to be very critical to you if you attend law school and plan on getting a license to practice law. And after passing the licensing exam, and some people have a hard time doing that, but if you do pass it, then you have to go through a character and fitness review. Some of you who perhaps have known lawyers might think that that's not a very rigorous review. I think it's become more rigorous over the years, but typically individuals receive approval. And I've also pointed out, because some folks, as they go through life, go through a period when they're younger where they get a little bit jammed up in the law or get jammed up with the military, and then they turn their life around. So if a person has a felony or misdemeanor conviction, or if they've been dishonorably discharged from the armed services of the United States. Before they go to law school, they can actually petition the regulatory agency in New York, which is Supreme Court Appellate Division, for an advance ruling as to whether the conviction or dishonorable discharge would operate to disqualify an application from getting a license. I think that's a great idea because a great process. Otherwise, a person could do their 3 years of law school, pass the bar exam, only to then be told that a felony or misdemeanor conviction or dishonorable discharge stands in their way. Then we reach the point where the license is issued. And in New York State, if we look at licensing, there's always what we call a licensing authority. For example, if a person has a liquor license, the licensing authority is the state liquor authority. If you've got a driver's license, the licensing authority is the Department of Motor Vehicles. I don't think we're breaking any new ground here, but the licensing authority for attorneys in New York State is the second highest court in the state, and it's called the Appellate Division of State Supreme Court. I also point out, and I'll talk more about this in other courses, that court is actually organized geographically into 4 different judicial departments. Here in Western New York, we're in the 4th department, which means then that most people, for example, who live in this area or go to law school in this area are probably going to apply for their license through the 4th department, and that's where they get admitted to practice law. But once a person gets that license to practice law, no matter what department, they are now licensed and they can practice law in New York State. The New York State license, however, does not permit a person to practice in any of the 49 other states, and so people strategize better do it earlier rather than later about how to pass licensing exams in different states. And there's a way to streamline that I don't believe we need to talk about at this point in your education. In terms of federal courts, one gets licensed to practice in the federal courts by applying to that particular federal court. Usually if you're licensed in good standing in the state court, the federal court will grant your application. And just by way of example, if I could pick on myself as a licensed attorney, so I'm licensed to practice law in New York State. I'm not licensed to practice law then, by way of example, in Pennsylvania. I have applied to and can practice law in the western and northern districts of New York and in the Second Circuit Court of Appeals, which is the federal court in New York City. If I ever had a case in front of the Supreme Court, I can assure you that I would apply for admission to the U.S. Supreme Court. Since I've never had to appear there as a lawyer as opposed to a tourist, then I've never had the need to obtain that license. Some lawyers, it's like a vanity license plate, will get an application to the U.S. Supreme Court so they can put the license on the wall of their office. I've had cases on paper in front of the U.S. Supreme Court trying to get there with mixed degrees of success, but I've never had the opportunity to appear personally. And if I needed to practice law in another federal court, for example, the Eastern or Southern District of New York, it would just be a matter of making the application and paying some money. But my license only permits me to practice law in the state of New York, and there was a time when I spent a lot of time in Florida, and at that point I had regretted that when I was younger and had a little bit more time that I didn't get the license to practice law in Florida, because I could have written off a lot of my travel expenses. The next thing we're going to talk about, but I'm going to do it in another video, is where can we find lawyers and what are they doing?